Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Today, Darlene will present the Metro design principles. She is a designer with the Windows Phone design group, and she will tell us all about what Metro is and how you can use it in your apps. Darlene, you're next.
All right.
Did you do that commercial?
I did not. I wish I could take credit. This is not working the way I thought it was going to. How do I get out of this again? So as ΓÇô said, I'm Darlene Wong. I'm a designer with the Windows Phone Design Studio. And I'm going to talk to you guys today about the Metro design story. And you guys are all app developers, right? You guys have all developed apps. How many of you have developed an app that's on the marketplace today? Show of hands. Cool. So I'm really excited because I'm glad that you guys are here to hear me talk about design, for one. So you guys must all be really familiar with the Windows Phone UI and what that looks like, tiles and lists and stuff. But there's a whole story behind how we got there, how we got from 6.5 to 7. And so with my talk tonight, I'm going to break it up into two parts. First, I'm going to tell you the story, how we got to Windows Phone 7, how we came up with the Metro design principles. I'm going to talk about what they are and try to relate them to that story. And then we'll switch gears a little bit, and I'll talk more about the design language. And those are the actual controls, the motion, and the parts of the UI. And I'll also try to connect that to the principles. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of how to use them as you're developing your apps. So many of you may have heard of the reset, which happened a couple of years ago with Windows Phone. And that was when we moved from 6.5 to 7. And if you remember, this is what 6.5 looked like. And it looks so different from what we have today with Metro. And just looking at it from a design perspective, it's a more iconographic style of design. And what that means basically is using icons to represent things in real life. So looking at just the bevel and the gradient, and besides all of that, just like in your contact list here, using, instead of imagery to relate who this contact, who this person is, we're using a little blue 3D man, and that really doesn't distinguish one contact from another. And then here in the home screen, I guess, there's a little set of playing cards that represent possibly games. There's an icon of a photo that represents, where your photos might live. And, I've never used 6.5, so I'm kind of just guessing at what this UI, how to use this UI. And as you can tell, I'm struggling a little bit to kind of understand how to use it. There's nothing really wrong with this approach, but I think that the design leads at the time recognized that there was something missing here. This UI doesn't really communicate or say anything to the user. It just, it's there. And really when you take a look at some of the embellishments that they've put on there, like this box around the date and time on the lock screen, I mean, what does that really accomplish? What does that do, right? It ends up just becoming noise and blocking the user from seeing content that maybe they're looking for. So this is Albert Shum. He's our studio design lead, and he was one of the main voices in starting us off thinking about Metro. So he, and along with, he wasn't the only one. We have many design leads, researchers, designers, a lot of really great thinkers that came together to try to point us in a new direction. But Windows Phone wasn't the only one in the company at the time thinking about good design. There was Windows Media Center, which I think was in the mid-2000s, and Bill Flora worked on it. From here, you start to see just a really open, clean design. You start to see open space, bold use of typography here, large font. And, I referenced earlier the bevel and the gradient, and I know here that you do see gradient, but I feel that here it feels secondary, and it doesn't block you from really seeing anything. Instead, this larger type really draws your eye in, and it says start, so obviously you're going to start there, and your eye kind of moves to the right with the horizontal navigation, and then as you pick your menu item, you start using the menu vertically. So it's all really clean, simple, structured. And then here, with the music library, I think you could think of it like if we did this the iconographic way, you could have come up with a representation of an album title. You could have had a picture of a CD in a CD cover kind of peeking out, and you could have listed them down the page. That might have represented albums, but here, these are the actual album titles, album covers, and you can see them in a grid, and the grid kind of helps put a lot of information in a smaller space. And I know it's a subtle difference, going from just an icon to the actual album cover, but I feel like that subtle difference is a really big one. It really gets the user to look at this UI in a different way and think about interacting with it in a different way. Then we have the Zune music experience. Again, you see the clean layout, the use of grid. But what I found interesting here was down in this corner, the we recommend. To me, this is where we really started talking directly to the user, right? We said, hey, we know you. From what you've listened to in the past, we think that you might like this. And we're starting to really connect with the user and something that they care about, the music that they're listening to. And then the Zune HD music player, what I feel is probably a stepping stone, getting to that mobile UI. So we moved, you can see the huge difference between the more iconographic style of design to the more infographic. And infographic, what we're used to today, not just changed the design look and feel overall, but I think that it really changed the way we thought about the experience that the user was having. We thought more about who they were and what was important to them. We thought about what their journey was as they were using the phone. And a lot of times when I talk about the UI, I think, it looks so simple, right? Maybe you just make a title, in a larger oversized font. Maybe you just put some images in a grid, but there's a lot more to that. You know, it seems effortless, but there's a lot of work and thought that went behind, that went into the thinking behind this design. And to get everyone on the same page of this new way of design thinking, we came up with Metro design principles. We think of these principles kind of as a golden rule, not hard and fast rules, but more like a guiding light, more like a direction that guides us towards creating enjoyable and meaningful experiences. So this is a poster that we have hanging up in our design studio, and it basically states the 5 principles, which I've highlighted in red, and I'll go over them. So the first, modern and clean. Sometimes we call this clean, light, open, and fast. And basically this means to just clean up the clutter, include only what's necessary. So like the examples I just showed, you know, take advantage of that negative space. Open space is okay. I think that it helps the user focus their eye in on the actual content and what is really important. And, you know, take a look at your existing designs too and try to strip away what is not needed. If you can free your design from clutter, the design starts to feel lighter. And if you focus your user's attention in on that message, the user can more easily move through the experience and they can get to their task faster. Alive in motion. So motion is, you know, it's delightful, it's fun. And motion, a lot of the motion in our device actually teaches the user something. It actually guides the user to how to use the UI. Take, for example, panoramas and how those animate in. As they animate in, you see the full image, you see the list passing by really briefly, and it's really quick and subtle, but when it lands on the leftmost side of the pano, and you can see the text kind of trail off and truncate off the side of the device screen. And that kind of gives the user a hint that there's more. You know, there's more to the right. Look here, look, discover. If you pan over, you can find it. And it's kind of fun, you know, that sense of discovery. And also think about the lock screen, that little bounce. It kind of alludes to, you know, if you just swipe this up, you can find something. You can unlock your phone. And all of this is instruction without words. It's all just with subtle motion cues. And it kind of makes the user feel smart, right? You haven't told them anything, yet they figured it out. And so, you know, it's pretty delightful. Content, you hear this maybe a lot, content not Chrome. And again, this refers to, you know, cleaning up some of that bevel and that gradient. It's not to say that you can't use it, but maybe thinking about how you use it, thinking about where it makes sense to use it. Because if it's a little too gratuitous, you know, if it's all over the place, sometimes it just blocks the real intent from what the user's trying to get to. And then celebrate typography. So typography can be useful and beautiful. It's a way to organize your content. Like if you think about it, most types of content is text, right? Like this poster, for example, it's all text. But it's using text in a smart way. It's very visual, you know, especially it can create that hierarchy of where to start, how you want the user to move through the content, what's most important. And then finally, authentic. This one, you know, sometimes you hear it being called authentically digital, and I think this is just another way of saying, you know, we're a digital space. A lot of times with being more iconographic, where you're trying to represent the world, you know, in a digital space, but you're trying to represent the real world, we get lost in trying to just copy what's in the real world versus being authentically what we are, which is a digital environment. And there's got to be a better way, other ways of moving through the digital space, something that makes sense for the digital environment. So these are our principles, and it's interesting to know that Metro is actually inspired by wayfinding signs. Wayfinding signs in airports, subways, and metro systems, hence the name Metro. And wayfinding signage actually has its roots in the Swiss style of design, also known as the international style of design. And there's a whole history, I think back in the 1950s, and it can go even further back to the 1930s, but back in the 1950s there was a whole history of designers, started with the Swiss, but then became more of an international movement that they centered on the thought that design could be simple yet functional. It could, Swiss style can be defined as the authentic pursuit for simplicity, and it's devoted to minimal elements like typography and content as opposed to the textures and the gradients and illustrations. It's a fierce reduction of elements, much like our principles. I just thought this quote kind of embodied it perfectly. As you're designing, it's not really, how do I design this app? What else do I put on? A lot of times it's just stripping things away, and the simplest thing, which is just the content or just the message, is really all you need. So you might be asking yourself, what do wayfinding signs have to do with the phone UI? Like, how do those two things relate? Well, I think it's the Swiss style is a way to communicate to a really broad audience in a clear and concise way, regardless of language. For example, if you're in an airport, you need to get to, you're about to miss your next flight, and you need to get to your next gate right away. Without clear signage, you could possibly miss your next flight. And the same thing goes with the phone. If you're rushing to your next meeting and you don't know where the meeting's at, you may not be able to get there as quickly. So these are just some examples of wayfinding signs, and just some examples of how it embodies the Swiss design. What you can see here is, the use of color for organization. Here with the subway map, you can see use of bold typography here to indicate direction where this subway is heading. And the Swiss style also talks about this grid system. And the grid system, I feel, really provides that structure so that, you can snap to a grid and there still feels like there's organization without necessarily having, to explicitly give organization. These are some real examples of Swiss design. The Olympics logo, for example. This is interesting because there could have been so many ways for them to design this logo. I mean, it could have been a bunch of athletes, standing together in a circle. It could have been people holding hands. It could have been a bunch of different flags, from different countries. But instead of all of that, they decided to go more abstract. It's just a plain white background, bold graphic circles that are interlinked. And I think that, you can pull a lot of meaning just from these simple shapes and colors. It still, to me, represents the joining of something and difference. There's different colors. So I think it's pretty successful. This is some examples of brochures from the '72 German Olympics. Again, really bold use of color and big typography, but you can also see use of the grid here, where all of these paragraphs are left aligned to the bottom of the two, and it's super subtle. I don't know that a lot of people actually pick that out, but just that simple alignment really gives a anchor and a structure to the content. And again, you know, with the Olympics, use of metaphors to speak without words. These are some icons that were created to represent the different events. So it's really easy to see, what event do I want to see? Gymnastics, swimming, running, and you don't have to know whatever language the host country. You can tell just by looking at the image. And again, wayfinding signs. It's really easy, no matter where you are, to find the bathroom. I mean, that's probably like the #1 looked for sign, right? And another reason we pulled inspiration from the Swiss style is just that it's timeless. You can still see evidence of Swiss style today, even though it's been around for 50+ years. Movie posters use it, advertisements, packaging, posters. And none of this feels dated, right? It still feels fresh and new. So with all of that said, what does this really mean, right? We talked about all the inspiration and wayfinding, and this is a picture here of a guy who is clearly not connected to his experience. He's not enjoying the moment he's in. He's stuck trying to do something on his phone. And so on top of all the principles, basically what we're trying to say is these principles are like the foundation. But what really makes our phone different? And we believe it's the end user and the end user's experience. And that's what really infuses that life into the UI. We want to know what their story is. We want to know what they care about. And we want to really connect with them. So next I'm going to show you a video. It's a little bit dated, you might be able to tell. But it's of Albert Shum, and he is talking about this personal, relevant, connected, being personal to the user, giving them the information that is relevant or most useful to them, and connecting them to those experiences.
When I came to Microsoft, I looked at, wow, this was a candy store. We have so much amazing technology. We have great music experiences, we have great gaming experiences, we have great email experiences. And how do you bring that all together for a user in a simple, seamless way? I think that really speaks to the power of Windows Phone. Now, we're saying, we're going to connect all this for you. You don't have to think about it. How do I bring that to our users? It presents you a way to navigate, but also a way to interact with the things that you care about. And that's really the new fresh start that we're bringing to Windows Phone. It's really stepping back and saying, what do I really want, and what do our consumers really want? And I think that was really the approach, and to say, hey, if we could do anything, what can we do? And looking at, there's a lot of ideas about, hey, how do you make smartphones smarter, and how do you make it, run faster, better graphics? But in some ways, that's really not what users are looking for. They just want a better experience. And we really said, hey, let's think about that. What do people really want in their lives? And we really key off on those kind of thinking and start building kind of what we start saying, our design philosophy of making a connection with our users and bringing those insights to the design, and really working with the engineering team to say, hey, what if we could do this? And how would we build this? I think that was a really great opportunities about how Microsoft, because we have this great, amazing technology, and I think bringing some insights with design, we can really harness the potential of creating a whole new phone experience for our users. Windows Phone, what is it about? What makes Windows Phone Windows Phone? And that softness, I think, comes from a couple of really key things that we thought about. we really thought about the end user as king. You know, what is really important? I think that hopefully you'll see that it's really authentic, that we really talk to real users out there, and we spend a lot of time talking to our users, not just to listen to what they do, but also saying, hey, we have this idea, what do you think? So really driving some of those insights, but also making the design come to life for them, and listening to how they use it, but also improving the design. I think that process of iterating and refining and building, I think that's a really speaks to the craft and care and passion we put into the product, so that the authentic soulfulness comes through. Hey, we have to take design not just as a way to make it look appealing, but I think we got to think about making it desirable. It's always that balance. When you do something new, you also have to ground it in something that people can understand. What will our users see first? I think hopefully they'll see themselves in the phone. I think that's a really key part of how we designed it. It's really focused on making this phone your phone. We took the idea of making it personal, so that when you look at it, the start experience, it's about your content, it's about your people, it's your pictures, it's your music, it's presented way up there. And it's my phone is going to be different than your phone, and I think that's a really key part, that personalized way of navigating the things that you care about, the things that you want to share, the things that you want to listen to, and really, I think those are the key moments of what we first present. It's your phone.
Whoa.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
That's a bad burn.
Oh, how do I get it off?
Minimize. Close the window.
Okay, sorry about that. That was pretty scary. Oh, and then, okay, we're back. All right, so that was the design principles. So hopefully you learned about, where the principles came from, what they are. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the design language, and this is, actually going through the controls and sorry. So here on the left, you can see these are the principles, right? And really, like I was saying earlier, it's the foundation. It's not meant to bind you in any way as you're developing apps. It's really meant to just create that solid base for which you can then spring off of and use all of these elements on the right, the navigation, the touch gestures, themes, and all of that, and really use that to create an app that's unique to you. So first off, this is our navigation model. It's a hub and spoke model. And what that means is that we always start at the start screen at the hub and take you off on your merry way down your task linearly. And when you're done, you always go back to start before you start a new task. And we think this works because, going back to the wayfinding example, it's really about knowing your way around, right? So if you are, again, in an airport and you see a sign that says Gate A is this way, and you're walking this way, you expect Gate A to be at the end of wherever you're going. And then eventually you come to a cross section and it says Gate A is back where you came from, you'd be pretty frustrated, right? And you'd be lost. So, I think that that's why this works. It's just an easy way for people to know where they are at any point in time. It gives them control over where they are. And then the page structure, again, if you've developed apps before, you're probably pretty familiar with this, but the status bar up at the top with the time and status of the phone, battery life, connection, and all of that. The application space is actually the entire middle, and then the application bar at the bottom, which can expand and minimize. This again just shows the canvas, and that the canvas extends beyond the screen limits, and that's done purposefully to really create a sense of space, an open sense of space. And then the grid. We talked about this with the Swiss style of design, right? Having that grid really keep you organized. And this is our grid, but you can see that it's not restricting in any way. You can actually break this up into any number of different ways. It's really very flexible. And if you take some examples of real UI like our start screen and overlay the grid on top of that, you start to see how it really does snap to this grid. And then you take another screen in our UI, the app list, it still snaps to the same grid. And the people, it just kind of shows you that all of these screens, they look so different, yet they're still rooted in the same grid structure. And you're not limited to any one type of design. And then orientation. What I just wanted to say here about orientation is just that, there's portrait and landscape, and as you're developing your apps, you don't really have to, you don't always have to use both orientations. There's sometimes where your app may just work better in just one orientation, and that's fine to just leave it that way. For example, our start screen, it only works in portrait mode, and because that's the way it looks best, it's presented best. Alternatively, another way you could think about it is the calculator app. If you use it in portrait mode, it's a simple calculator. If you turn it horizontally one way, I think it's a scientific calculator. And I didn't realize this, but actually if you flip it and turn it horizontal the other way, it's a third type of calculator. So it's kind of neat how you can actually use orientation to change up the way a user would use your application. And then again, typography. We use XGO, and XGO is, it's a default font. You get it when you download the toolkit. It's a sans serif font, meaning it's clean line. There's no curls or embellishments. And it's created specifically for use on the device screen. So it looks best, both with a light background and a dark background. And it's not to say that you can only use this font. You can definitely use, you can even use a serif font, the curlier, more decorative type of font. And I have some examples. I think the New York Times and DC Comics are two great examples of apps that successfully use serif fonts. It's just more of thinking about what makes sense for your app, and just not using it in a way that'll make sense. Something that's not too over the top, keeping it subtle, but still using it as a way to bring that personality into your app. And then motion. Again, with all the motion, it's, besides being really interesting and pretty, it's, like I said earlier, used to communicate something. And most of these are available in the toolkit. But, like turnstile here, it's used to go between large spaces. So jumping from task to task or app to app. Continuum, this is once you're in an area like email and you're drilling down, so then you drill down to the list. And then, are the animations actually playing, or are they not? They're not playing? They're supposed to play. I'm sorry about that. You want me to switch back to the PowerPoint? Hold on.
Didn't we switch PowerPoint?
We did, to see a video. There's some motion on these slides.
You just switch to PowerPoint down on the bottom on the.
I have it here.
Yeah.
You could just click resume.
Here we go. Resume slideshow? No. How do I exit out? It's not on the right slide.
No, I think I've resumed from the first.
Yeah, you can press right click the slide you want and then start from there. Or set here.
There we go. There. So yeah, so turnstile, going into apps. Continuum, drilling in, like in email, drilling into the actual email. Swivel, this is kind of more transient, so where you just need to tell the user something quickly and then leave. And then a slide. This is mostly used in wizard type scenarios, just to get from screen to screen. And then of course there's always custom animations, and here this shows some custom animation. I think it's best to try to get some help from someone who's experienced with motion design when creating custom motion. But it is possible, and just again thinking about what makes sense with your app, what would be something that would enhance the user's experience while they're using your app, and still concentrate mainly on the content. And iconography, these are icons. This is just a really small set. We've got hundreds of metaphors that we've created, and these are all icons that are associated with some kind of action. They all mean something and say something to the user. Imagery and photos, definitely, it's part of the Swiss style of design to use photos over images or over drawings and illustrations. So definitely, photos really bring a sense of life and a sense of space. Like here, and the start screen really makes you feel like you're starting off, on a golf game. And just the only thing to think about too, though, as you use photography, is just to remember that that it's used in a way that enhances. So like this one, the people are here on the right, and it leaves this nice kind of dark open space so that the text is still readable. So that's why this works, right? You've got this nice, big image, which is interesting to the user, but it doesn't block them from what they're the menu that they're trying to use. And then panoramas and pivots. So panoramas, with this, we kind of recommend that there's no more than 3 to 5 panels on this panorama. Just, thinking about, this is really more of a place for people to navigate. I guess you could think of it like a magazine cover, right? So usually there's a really big picture in the background, and each of the panels kind of represent that little blurb or that little tidbit that teases you into the app. It just tries to get you interested just enough without telling you everything, and then you would then dive in for more. So panoramas should only be used in portrait view, and you can see how we just try to minimize all the distractions. So like the system tray at the top's gone, the app bar is minimized, and yeah. These are just more examples of other apps and how they use panos. And then pivots, which is very similar, and just to give you an idea of the difference, if a panorama is like the magazine cover, I sort of think of pivots as the table of contents. It's much more about the content and about the task, what you're trying to do with this app. With pivots, maybe no more than 7. Just really think about the navigation and how your user is going to get around your app. And here it's okay. I mean, the app bar is a lot more visible and stuff like that. We're not trying to focus the user in on anything specific here, except that they're navigating through your app. And finally, tiles. So tiles are what we feel really differentiate us, the look of our phone from other phones. It's very unique to Windows Phone. And there's a lot of functionality that can go behind the tile. So, you know, there's live tiles. And with your apps, you can use a live tile to your advantage to surface things that you think the user might need to know. So, for example, I'm sure you've seen these apps, but like news apps might surface the latest headline. A weather app might show the temperature for a certain location. Maybe a shopping app could show the latest sales. It's really up to you what you want to surface to the user. And they can be really customizable too. I mean, you can really bring it to life with your logo. If you want it to be customizable to the user's theme, you know, there are ways to do that. So that's basically everything I wanted to tell you about, you know, the story of wayfinding, how the design principles, and kind of going over some of the design language. But just as a little extra, I thought maybe it would be helpful to go over some app examples, some real apps that we feel are designed well. We could maybe talk about why we think that they're designed well and point out what they do. So here we have Amazon Kindle. Just curious, what do you guys think? Like, what of this UI do you think is Metro? It's got the grid, right? It's got the list. And you know, logo right up in the corner.
Seems pretty Metro overall.
It does, but at the same time, it's also very Amazon. It's really got their personality in there, and you know, it's the use of this image here. It's a really recognizable image in the background here for Kindle, right? But it's not taking up the entire screen. It's kind of in the background. It's kind of off-centered, but you know that it's there. And it's just a really simple UI. It's just, you know, book covers as the way to navigate. It's a good balance, I think, of both Metro design and of Amazon's personality. And here's the example I was telling you earlier about DC Comics and their use of the Serif Font. So their logo is this very recognizable font. They've used it here again in the titles, which is good. But again, you know, it's not gratuitous. They've only used it there. Down here in this part of the list, it's they use Sego, and everything's just very clean and simple. The logo is small, and it feels very appropriate for the type of app that it is. With Evernote here, again, like, so this is where, you know, they're starting to go a little off, I think, from exactly what is Metro, right? So they've got this really bold start or splash screen where it's very obvious. You know, this is Evernote, it's their logo, it's sign in. Then when you go in, going from this really loud splash screen, they go to a really small logo here, and then everything under here is basically lists and stuff, but they've customized their buttons, and they've customized the color in their list. They've done a few things a little different, but it really says Evernote. The color is very recognizable. All of that. So it's still successful, you know, it still works. with ESPN, again, there were, it's basically pivot, but there's a couple of small things that really differentiate this and make it specifically ESPN. One is the ticker down at the bottom here, which is, you know, obviously that's not something that we do with the phone UI, but it's something they added in because it made sense for them. And then also the design of the score boxes where there's an outline around it. And I know we've said a lot of times, you know, strip out all the things that you don't need, but in this case, this did feel right. This did feel like it was something that was needed. In New York Times, this is the other example of a serif font. It works here. I think, you know, it's a really simple layout for the newspaper. It looks like a very simplified version of their website, right? All of their text is a serif font, but it feels appropriate for a newspaper. They've got their breaking news up here at the top, and the use of their logo as the Pano headline. And then the final example is the Bank of America app. And then again, you know, I think this is my favorite just because it kind of really goes off of the Metro design principles, as we've stated earlier. Like, there's the use of gradient here, and none of these list styles are really our Metro list styles. But what's nice about it is that you still feel like there's some hint of Metro here, right? It's still clean. It's still really simple and pared down, but it's a bank app, and it's okay to be what they are, which is, you know, they have to show you this. They have a lot of information to show, you know, and so they're going to surface it to you. And so I guess if there's any message that you take away from this whole talk, is that the Metro design principles really are just a set of guidelines, and it's something that you think about as you're developing. It's definitely something that you try to stick close to, but it's not hard and fast, and it's really up for your interpretation how is best for your app to be designed. So I hope this was really helpful for you, and thank you for letting me present to you.
Will you do any questions, or?
I can do a few. Should we?
Would you like to any questions? Do you guys have any questions? We will come back. We'll speak afterwards, but
We
would you like
can.
to get some or not?
No, I think we can do them after.
Okay.
Should we?
Okay. Okay. Let's stop the presentation. We'll consider it stopped at this point.